What are your relationship worst stories? Story 1. I was madly in love, and he seemed to be too until he suddenly started acting cold and indifferent. Despite my efforts to communicate, he became increasingly distant. Eventually, he ghosted me completely. It wasn't until a mutual friend told me that I found out he had been seeing someone else for months. He had even moved in with her while still keeping up the pretense of being with me. The betrayal shattered my trust in relationships, and it took a long time to rebuild my confidence. Story 2. He convinced me to move across the country with him, promising a fresh start and a new life together. I left behind my family, friends, and a job I loved. Once we settled in, he became distant and would stay out late without explanation. One night he came home and casually mentioned that he had reconnected with an ex and was moving out. I was blindsided, left in a city where I knew no one, and had to scramble to find a place to live. I had to rebuild my life from scratch, and it took me years to feel secure again. Story 3. We had been dating for 3 years when he suddenly broke up with me out of the blue. He said he needed to find himself. I later discovered through mutual friends that he had been seeing someone else for 6 months. When I confronted him, he admitted it and said he wanted to explore other options. It felt like a punch to the gut, realizing I had been living a lie for so long. The worst part was him trying to justify his actions by saying he was doing us both a favor. Story 4. My ex was always controlling, but I never realized how bad it was until we moved in together. He would monitor my phone calls, track my whereabouts, and criticize every aspect of my life. One day, I came home to find my things packed and a note telling me to leave. He had already moved another woman into our apartment. The sheer cruelty of being discarded like that was devastating. It took me a long time to regain my independence and self-worth. Story 5. We were together for 5 years and everything seemed perfect. We had even started looking at houses to buy together. Then, one day, out of nowhere, he sat me down and told me he wasn't sure he loved me anymore. He said he needed space and wanted to take a break. I was blindsided and heartbroken, but agreed, hoping it was just a phase. A week later, I found out through social media that he was already seeing someone else. They had been planning this behind my back for months. I felt completely betrayed, like our entire relationship was a lie. He moved on so quickly, while I was left picking up the pieces of my shattered life. It took years to regain trust in anyone. Story 6. I was engaged, and we were planning our wedding when I found out he had a secret family. He had another woman and a child in a different city. He had been lying to both of us for years. When confronted, he tried to spin it as if he was protecting me from the truth. I felt like my entire relationship was a sham. I had to call off the wedding and go through the heartbreak of untangling our lives. The betrayal left a scar, and trusting someone again has been a challenge. Story 7. My ex convinced me to quit my job and move in with him to a new city. He said he wanted to support me while I pursued my dream of going back to school. A few months in, he started becoming distant, staying out late, and often ignoring my calls. One day he came home and casually mentioned that he had met someone else and was leaving me. I was devastated and completely unprepared. I had no job, no savings, and was in a city where I knew no one. He didn't even help me move out. I had to pack up and leave on my own. Starting over from scratch was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Story 8. He was my best friend and my boyfriend. We did everything together, and I trusted him completely. Then one night he told me he needed to talk. He confessed that he had been cheating on me with multiple people throughout our entire relationship. He claimed he was just exploring his sexuality and that he hoped I would understand. I was shattered, unable to comprehend how someone who claimed to love me could betray me so deeply. I felt used and discarded, like I was just a placeholder while he figured out what he wanted. It took me a long time to get over the betrayal and the feeling of being lied to for so long. Story 9. I thought we had the perfect relationship. We were always laughing, spending time together, and planning our future. Then, one day, I came home early from work and found him in our bed with someone else. He didn't even look guilty or ashamed. He just told me he was bored and that it was just sex. I felt like my heart was ripped out of my chest. I packed my things and left that day. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the realization that he didn't value our relationship at all. Moving on was incredibly difficult, but in the end, I realized I deserved someone who would never make me feel like an option. Story 10. We had been married for 4 years when he told me he wanted a divorce. He said he had fallen out of love and wanted to find himself. I was devastated, but I respected his decision. It wasn't until months later, during the divorce proceedings, that I found out he had been having an affair with a coworker for over a year. He even had the nerve to introduce her to his family while we were still married. The betrayal was a knife to the heart, and the worst part was that he acted like it was all my fault for not seeing it coming. I had to rebuild my life from the ground up, and it took a long time to trust anyone again. Story 11. We were together for nearly 7 years. He was my first love, and we had plans to get married, buy a house, and start a family. I supported him through his schooling and career struggles, putting my own dreams on hold. One day he sat me down and said he needed a break to figure out what he wanted in life. He promised it wasn't about anyone else, just that he needed space. I was devastated, but agreed, hoping that he would come back to me. Not even 2 weeks later, he was in a new relationship with a woman he had been seeing on the side. He didn't just leave me, he left me for someone else he had lined up. Finding out that he had been emotionally cheating on me while I stood by him was the most gut-wrenching experience. It took me years to stop feeling like I was the problem. Story 12. He was charming, loving, and seemed like the perfect partner. After 2 years of dating, he proposed, and I said yes without hesitation. We started planning our wedding, and I was on cloud 9. Then, a few months before the wedding, I started noticing changes. He was distant, always on his phone, and kept finding excuses to stay out late. One night, he didn't come home, and I was frantic with worry. When he finally showed up the next day, he confessed that he had been having an affair for the past 6 months. He said he felt trapped and wasn't ready to settle down. He broke off the engagement and left me with a pile of wedding plans and a broken heart. I felt humiliated and used, like I was nothing but a backup plan until something better came along. It took a long time to rebuild my self-esteem after that betrayal. Story 13. We were high school sweethearts, and everyone thought we were the perfect couple. We went to college together, shared an apartment, and had plans for the future. Then, out of nowhere, he started acting cold and distant. He was always busy with study groups and late-night projects. One day, I found a message on his laptop from another girl, talking about how much she missed him and couldn't wait to be with him again. When I confronted him, he didn't even try to deny it. He told me he had fallen out of love with me and had been seeing this other girl for months. He said he was too scared to tell me and was hoping I'd figure it out on my own. The worst part was, he acted like I should have known all along and blamed me for not seeing the signs. The betrayal from someone I had trusted for so many years left a scar that took ages to heal. Story 14. We met at work and it was an instant connection. We started dating and everything was going great. He was attentive, caring, and always made me feel special. Then, after a year, he suggested we move in together. I was hesitant but excited about taking the next step. Little did I know, this was the beginning of the end. After we moved in, he started changing. He became controlling, always questioning where I was and who I was with. He'd go through my phone, monitor my social media, and accuse me of cheating. It got to the point where I felt like a prisoner in my own home. I found out later that his accusations were a projection of his own guilt. He had been cheating on me with multiple women the entire time we were together. When I confronted him, he turned it around on me, saying it was my fault for not being enough for him. It shattered my confidence and made me question my self-worth for years. Story 15. I was with him for 3 years and we were the couple everyone envied. We had this unspoken bond and I thought we were inseparable. We went on trips together, met each other's families, and even started talking about getting married. Then one day he came home and said he had been offered a job in another state. It was his dream job and I was supportive, even if it meant a long-distance relationship for a while. We agreed that I would join him after a few months once he got settled. We had plans and I was excited about our future. However, once he moved, his calls became less frequent and his texts were short and distant. When I visited him a month later, I found out the heartbreaking truth. He had already moved in with someone else, a woman he met at his new job. He had been cheating on me, and when confronted, he simply said he realized he wanted a fresh start. I was left alone in a city I didn't know, with a heart full of betrayal. The worst part was the realization that he had planned this all along, using the job as an excuse to get away from me. Story 16. We had been dating for 2 years when he suggested we take a trip to Europe together. I was thrilled and thought this was a sign he was thinking about our future. The trip started off amazing. We were exploring new places, enjoying romantic dinners, and making memories. Then, halfway through the vacation, I noticed he was acting strange, constantly on his phone and taking calls in private. One night, while he was in the shower, a message popped up on his phone from a number I didn't recognize. I couldn't help myself and read it. It was was from another woman saying how much she missed him and couldn't wait for him to come back. My heart sank. When I confronted him, he admitted to having an ongoing affair with this woman and said he brought me on this trip to figure out his feelings. I felt like the world had crumbled beneath me. He had used this vacation as a cover-up for his indecision, stringing me along while he figured out if he wanted to be with someone else. I was devastated, stuck in a foreign country with a man I no longer knew.